After my husband passed away, I moved in with my son Mark, believing family was meant to be a shelter, a safe harbor in life's later years. For a while, it was. We shared dinners, laughter, and memories. I babysat his children, kept the house clean, tried to make my presence a blessing, not a burden. But comfort has a way of breeding contempt when gratitude fades. At a Sunday family gathering, with relatives packed into every corner of the house, Mark stood up and announced that unless I started paying rent, market value, he said, I would need to find somewhere else to live. His voice was loud, sharp, calculated. The faces around me blurred with shock, pity, or worse, indifference. I stood there humiliated, feeling the walls I had once called home closing in on me. But what Mark didn't know was that I had a few things tucked quietly away: savings, patience, and a stubborn streak as old as time. The next morning, while he was at work, I made a call. By the end of the week, the house he thought he ruled belonged to me. And this time, there would be no misunderstandings about who truly had the final word. Have you ever been pushed aside by someone you loved, only to find strength you didn't even know you had? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more true life tales of dignity, quiet resilience, and unexpected redemption. The days after reclaiming the house unfolded in a slow, almost surreal way. Mark and his wife stayed quiet at first, maybe hoping I would reconsider, or that this whole situation could be swept under the rug without real change. But I didn't waver. I had spent a lifetime putting others first, swallowing hurts, ignoring slights in the name of family. This time was different. I had set a boundary, and no matter how uncomfortable it made everyone else, I was determined to hold it. I hired a property manager to draw up a formal lease agreement, complete with a fair market rent, utilities included, payment dates clearly outlined. I sent it over through official channels, treating the situation not like a family squabble, but like the business arrangement it had become. The reaction was predictable. There were whispered arguments behind closed doors, tense dinners where no one met my eye, cold glances exchanged like daggers across the kitchen. At first, guilt gnawed at the edges of my resolve. I questioned myself late at night, lying awake, in the room that had once belonged to guests, now reclaimed as my own. Was I being cruel? Had I gone too far? But each time that old fear crept in, I reminded myself of the moment I stood at the kitchen sink, humiliated in front of everyone I knew, treated like a burden rather than the woman who had given everything for this family. I reminded myself that respect isn't something you beg for, it's something you demand, by the way you allow yourself to be treated. Slowly, the household settled into a new, uncomfortable normal. Mark signed the lease, though he didn't speak to me for days afterward. His wife kept her distance, polite but cold. The children, innocent in all of this, clung to me even tighter, their small arms wrapping around my waist as they babbled about school and friends and weekend plans. I loved them fiercely, but I made a quiet vow to myself. I would no longer stay anywhere I wasn't respected, even for their sake. I would be their safe place, but not at the cost of my own dignity. One afternoon, as I sat in the sunroom reading a worn paperback, Mark approached me. He shifted from foot to foot, clearing his throat the way he used to when he was a boy caught, sneaking cookies before dinner. "Mom," he began awkwardly, I didn't mean for it to happen like that." I looked up, calm, steady. "But it did," I said simply. He nodded, shame flickering across his face. I thought, "You'd just understand. I didn't think it would get so bad." I closed the book gently in my lap. "You didn't think because you didn't have to," I said, not unkindly. "You assumed I'd keep taking whatever was handed to me. You assumed love meant I'd accept anything, even humiliation. You were wrong." The words hung between us, heavy but necessary. He didn't argue. He didn't offer excuses. He simply nodded again, slower this time, and left me to my book and the warm spill of afternoon sunlight across the floor. I knew then that true change wouldn't come overnight. It might never come fully. But it wasn't my job to fix Mark. It wasn't my job to teach him lessons he had chosen not to learn when I tried before. It was my job to live my life with the dignity I had fought so hard to reclaim. And that meant holding the line, even when it was hard, even when part of me ached for things to be easier, softer, sweeter. That meant recognizing that sometimes love looks like forgiveness, but sometimes it looks like firm, unshakable boundaries. In the weeks that followed, things remained civil but distant. I tended the garden that had once been my refuge, pulling weeds, planting new life. I painted the sunroom in soft, warm colors that made the space feel truly mine. I joined a small, walking group at the community center, made new friends who saw me not as someone's mother or grandmother, but simply as Margaret, a woman with her own stories, her own dreams, her own worth. And slowly, surely, I realized that I wasn't rebuilding the old life I had lost. I was building something entirely new, something sturdier, something real. I didn't need to be anyone's burden. I didn't need to be anyone's afterthought. I was enough, just as I was, standing on my own 2 feet, in the home I had claimed, not through anger, but through quiet, unshakable strength. Life inside the house grew tense in the weeks that followed, like a rope pulled taut, ready to snap at any sudden movement. Mark and his wife kept their distance, speaking to me only when absolutely necessary, and even then with a politeness so forced it felt more insulting than kind. Meals were eaten in awkward silence. Doorways became places of quiet negotiation, and the once warm, bustling home now felt divided down invisible lines. The grandkids, sensing the undercurrent, stayed close to me whenever they could, their innocent chatter a welcome sound in the increasingly strained atmosphere. But even their laughter couldn't completely hide the growing discomfort that hung over the house like a storm cloud. I had thought that reclaiming the house would bring me a measure of peace, but peace built on wounded pride and forced cohabitation was brittle, fragile. Every small inconvenience became an unspoken accusation. Who left the porch light on? Who forgot to unload the dishwasher? Who tracked dirt across the clean floors? Small things, meaningless things, but under the weight of unresolved hurt, they grew into simmering resentments. I did my best to stay neutral, to remain calm, but I could feel it too. That needling sensation that I didn't truly belong here anymore, even if the deed said otherwise. Some nights, I heard whispered arguments. Behind closed doors, snatches of Mark's frustration bleeding through the thin walls. Other nights, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how things had unraveled so completely, wondering if there was still a way to mend what had been broken without betraying the hard-earned self-respect I had fought to reclaim. It all came to a head one rainy evening when a simple disagreement over a grocery bill exploded into something far uglier. Mark, tired and short-tempered, accused me of making life harder, of changing the atmosphere of the home, of holding the house over their heads like some kind of threat. His wife chimed in, her voice sharp and cold, suggesting that maybe it would be better if they found a new place altogether. I listened, silent, as the words poured out, accusations, projections, frustrations that had little to do with groceries and everything to do with pride. In that moment, I realized something with startling clarity. This house, this situation, this fractured relationship, none of it could be forced back into something whole by sheer willpower. What was broken would not be fixed simply because I wished it so. Love, family, respect, these things could not be demanded or maneuvered. They had to be freely given, and if they weren't, no legal deed or familial tie could manufacture them. When the shouting quieted into an uneasy silence, I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate. I told Mark and his wife calmly that perhaps they were right. Perhaps it was time for a change. I wasn't evicting them. I wasn't retaliating. but I was ready to move forward in my life in a way that no longer tethered me to resentment, walking on eggshells or waiting for gratitude that would never come. I gave them 60 days to find a new place, a generous amount considering the circumstances, and offered to assist them with the transition if they wished. Mark's face twisted with a mixture of anger, humiliation, and something like sorrow, but I didn't waver. I had spent too many years compromising myself for the sake of keeping peace that was always conditional. This time, I would protect my hard-earned peace at all costs. In the days that followed, the house grew even quieter. Mark avoided me entirely. His wife barely spoke above a whisper. The children, sweet and uncomprehending, clung to our remaining time together, unaware of the larger decisions being made around them. I cherished those moments, memorized their laughter, their hugs, knowing that change was coming. And yet, beneath the sadness, I felt something else growing stronger each day, a deep, unshakable sense of rightness. I wasn't the villain here, nor was I a victim. I was a woman who had finally drawn a line in the sand and stood firmly behind it. It was painful, yes. Change always is. But it was necessary. Because sometimes love alone isn't enough to sustain a relationship. Sometimes love must be balanced with respect, with dignity, with the unwavering belief that you are worthy of being treated with kindness, not just when it's easy, but always. As the rain continued to fall outside, drumming steadily against the windows, I understood that real peace isn't found in clinging to what once was. It's found in letting go, even when your heart aches with the weight of it, and trusting that what you build in its place will be stronger, truer, and finally, fully your own. The silence that filled the house after that final decision was different from the tense, bitter quiet of the weeks before. It was a silence of resignation, of inevitability, like the last few pages of a book slowly turning before the cover finally closes. And in that space, something inside me finally exhaled. I had spent so many years carrying the heavy weight of family expectations, of unspoken debts, of obligations that stretched far beyond love into a kind of self-erasure. In the early days after my husband's death, I clung to the idea that Mark would step into the role of protector, that he would honor the bond we had always shared. But in truth, I had placed my happiness, my stability, in the hands of someone who wasn't ready to carry it, and perhaps never had been. It wasn't his betrayal that hurt the most. It was my own mistaken belief that my sacrifices had somehow secured my place in his life. As I moved through the house, sorting through old belongings, boxing up things that no longer belonged to this new chapter, I felt the grief of it all in my bones. Not just for the lost relationship with my son, but for the version of myself that had accepted so little for so long, believing that unconditional love meant unconditional acceptance of poor treatment. I grieved for the years I had given away too freely, for the times I swallowed hurt instead of speaking it aloud, for the silent belief that to be needed was the same thing as being loved. And yet, intertwined with that grief was something else, something steadier and more precious: pride. I was proud of myself for standing up, proud of myself for reclaiming my dignity, proud of myself for refusing to shrink any longer just to fit into someone else's expectations. I realized slowly and tenderly that it's not unkind to expect respect. It's not unloving to set boundaries. It's not betrayal to choose yourself when others will not. Some nights were harder than others. I would find a forgotten item of Mark's, an old school project, a framed photo from a family vacation, and the memories would rise up, bittersweet and sharp. I would sit on the edge of the bed, tracing the outlines of those old days with my mind, and allow myself to feel the full ache of them. Because ignoring pain doesn't heal it. Only acknowledging it can. But I never allowed those moments to drag me back into guilt or regret. I honored them, then set them down, the way you might set down a heavy bag after carrying it for far too long. I filled the empty spaces with new things, plants that stretched eagerly toward the windows, a fresh coat of paint on the walls, new books stacked on the side tables. I filled my time with walks, with quiet mornings spent watching the sunrise with a cup of tea warming my hands, with evenings listening to old records that made me feel young and limitless again. I built a new life inside the old walls, one rooted not in obligation, but in choice. I chose peace. I chose joy. I chose myself. And slowly, the echoes of disappointment faded, replaced by the simple, enduring pleasure of living each day on my own terms. I didn't hate Mark. I didn't even resent him anymore. I wished him well, truly. I hoped he found happiness, growth, the wisdom that sometimes only comes from deep mistakes. But I no longer waited for his apology, his recognition, his validation. Healing had taught me that closure doesn't always come from others. Sometimes it's something you give yourself, quietly, bravely, and without permission. I often thought about the moment I first stood at the kitchen sink, humiliated, so many months ago. I thought about the woman I was then, hopeful, trusting, willing to accept so little just to stay close to the ones she loved. And I thanked her, because without her faith, without her willingness to love without limits, I wouldn't have found the strength to rebuild when the walls finally crumbled. She got me here, to this place of strength and self-respect. She was part of the journey, but she wasn't the whole story. I had become someone stronger, someone who knew deep down that love without respect is not enough, and that home is not where you're simply allowed to stay, it's where you're truly welcomed, truly valued. And now, finally, I had found my way home, home inside my own heart. With the decision made and the future beginning to take shape, a strange kind of lightness returned to my days, the kind of weightlessness that follows after setting down something too heavy to carry any longer. The tension inside the house eased, not because old wounds had healed, but because there was no longer a desperate need to pretend that everything was fine. Mark and his wife began making plans to move out, their conversations more businesslike, their interactions with me careful, respectful in a way they hadn't been before, not affectionate, but courteous, as if recognizing the boundaries I had drawn around myself. I moved quietly around the house during those weeks, tending to my garden, reading late into the evening, and beginning small projects I had put off for years. I repainted the upstairs bedroom, hung new curtains, planted rows of vibrant flowers along the fence. Each small act was a declaration, a way of reclaiming not just the space, but my sense of belonging in it. It felt good to make choices just for myself again, to not have to explain or justify my needs to anyone. I wasn't gloating, wasn't trying to make a point. I was simply living, and living fully. One morning, as I sat sipping coffee on the porch, Mark joined me. He sat in silence for a while before speaking, his voice low and rough. "We're moving next month," he said. "We found a place. Smaller, but it'll work." I nodded, not pressing, not asking for details. It wasn't my place to question his path anymore. "That's good," I said simply. He hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Mom, for everything, even when I didn't deserve it." There was no grand apology, no tears, but in that simple sentence, I heard something genuine. Not full understanding, perhaps, but a step toward it. I smiled softly and looked out across the yard, the morning light catching on the dewdrops clinging to the grass. "I just want you to be happy," I said, and I meant it. But this time, I also wanted myself to be happy, and I understood now that those two hopes didn't have to be tied together. I had spent so much of my life making room for others, bending myself to fit their needs, shrinking to avoid making anyone uncomfortable. But now, I was learning that true love, real, healthy love, doesn't demand that you disappear. It invites you to stand fully in your own life. As Mark got up to leave, I stayed where I was, savoring the simple pleasure of the morning, the coffee cooling in my hand, the garden bursting into color before me. Life was moving forward, And for once, I wasn't chasing after it, desperate. To keep up or be included, I was exactly where I needed to be. The month leading up to Mark and his family's departure passed in a strange mixture of anticipation and lingering sadness. On the surface, everything remained civil. We exchanged polite conversations about moving trucks and utility transfers, careful to keep the discussions neutral and practical. But beneath it all, an undeniable current of resentment brewed. It wasn't just from them, it was in me too, though I fought hard not to let it sour the progress I had made. Despite the peace I had fought for and largely secured, old habits have a way of clawing their way back when you least expect them. Late one evening, I overheard Mark and his wife arguing behind their closed bedroom door, their voices, low but intense, carried through the thin walls. I didn't want to listen, but it's hard to unhear things that cut straight through your heart. His wife's voice, sharp with frustration, hissed, "If your mother cared about us, she wouldn't have done this. She's treating us like tenants, like strangers." And Mark's response, muted but still bitter, "She's making a point. She's punishing us." I sat there in my own room, staring at the ceiling, letting their words wash over me, letting them sting. For a moment, old guilt flared, hot and accusing. Was I punishing them? Had I become the very thing I promised myself I would never be, vindictive, cold, unforgiving? But then, slowly, clarity settled back into me, steady and unwavering. I wasn't punishing anyone. I had simply stopped allowing myself to be treated. Like an afterthought, I had stopped begging to be respected. And for people who had grown accustomed to my endless sacrifices, my sudden insistence on dignity must have felt like punishment. But it wasn't. It was necessary. Still, the tension grew thicker as the moving day approached. Small slights crept into daily life, ignored greetings, slammed doors, passive-aggressive remarks about living in someone else's house. It would have been easy to retaliate, to snap back, to remind them of who had started all of this. But I didn't. I rose above it, not because I didn't feel the sting, but because I had already chosen my peace over their approval. The day, before they were set to move, an argument broke out over something trivial, a missing toolbox, a misplaced set of keys. Voices escalated, frustrations boiled over, and suddenly all the resentment that had been simmering for weeks erupted into the open. Mark accused me of betrayal, of turning my back on my own blood. His wife accused me of humiliation, of tearing apart their family. They threw words like weapons, each one sharp and aching. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, their accusations, raining down on me, and for the first time, I didn't crumble. I didn't shrink. I didn't defend myself. I simply listened. I let them empty themselves of every angry word they needed to say. And when they finally stopped, when the room hung heavy with the silence of spent rage, I spoke as calmly as I could. I loved you enough to give you a home without asking for anything. I loved you enough to trust you would protect me when I needed shelter in return. I loved you enough to believe that family meant more than money or pride. I still love you, but I love myself too now, and I will not apologize for that. Mark's face crumpled, a mixture of anger, regret, and helplessness flashing across it. His wife looked away, her lips pressed into a tight, bitter line. I didn't wait for a reply. I turned and walked away, the final, silent statement that some conversations do not need to be finished to be understood. That night, I slept deeply, peacefully, without the usual tightness in my chest that had haunted me for months. I knew the next day would be hard. I knew watching them leave would break something tender inside me. But I also knew that sometimes letting go isn't the end of love. It's the beginning of self-respect, and that was a foundation strong enough to build the rest of my life on. The morning of their move arrived gray and heavy with the threat of rain, as if the sky itself was reluctant to watch this chapter come to an end. I woke early, not because I needed to, but because some part of me understood that I needed to see it through, to witness it fully, to honor both the pain and the progress it represented. I moved around the house quietly, making coffee, tidying, up small things as if preparing for guests, though none would come. I heard the shuffle of feet upstairs, the low murmur of hurried conversations, the scrape of furniture against floors as boxes were dragged and stacked. I stayed out of the way, not from bitterness, but from respect, giving them space to leave without confrontation. When the moving truck pulled into the driveway, I watched from the window, sipping my coffee slowly, feeling both heartbreak and relief swell inside me. This house had seen so much, love and laughter, sorrow and silence, and now it would see another kind of transition, one born from lessons hard-earned and boundaries fiercely protected. Mark came down the stairs first, his arms full of boxes, his eyes darting around as if unsure whether to acknowledge me. I met his gaze briefly, offering a small, steady nod. No anger, no pity, just acknowledgement. His wife followed, her expression tight, her body stiff with pride or resentment. I couldn't tell which anymore. The children tumbled down behind them, their small faces confused and sad, not fully understanding why everything was changing. I knelt down to their level, smoothing their hair, whispering soft reassurances that they were loved, that they would always be loved, no matter where they lived. Their hugs nearly broke me, but I held myself together, smiling through the sting, in my chest. Love didn't disappear just because circumstances did. It simply found new ways to exist. The loading of the truck took hours, the once full, lively house slowly emptying, becoming hollow and echoing in a way that made every sound seem sharper, more final. I moved room to room behind them, checking for anything left behind, wiping down surfaces, touching door frames lightly as if blessing them for the next chapter. When the truck was finally full, Mark stood in the living room, the last box in his hands, his face unreadable. He cleared his throat, looked at me, and said simply, "Goodbye, Mom." There was a time when those words would have shattered me, would have left me chasing after him, begging for one more chance to make things right. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I smiled gently, feeling the full weight of my decision settle into something solid and unmovable inside me. "Goodbye, Mark. Take care of yourself," I said. No bitterness, no sarcasm, just truth. They filed out the door, the children waving back at me from the back seat of the car, their faces pressed to the glass. I waved back, holding their gaze, until the car disappeared down the street, the moving truck rumbling behind them. When the house finally settled into silence, I stood in the middle of the living room, letting the emptiness surround me, letting it wash over me without fear. This was not a loss. This was a beginning. I was not abandoned. I had chosen this. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself another cup of coffee, and sat at the table with the morning light streaming through the windows. The house felt different. Now, still yes, but not sad, peaceful, full of possibilities. I didn't rush to fill the space. I didn't call friends to chase away the loneliness. I simply sat there, letting the moment exist in all its bittersweet beauty. I had faced the hardest thing I ever thought I would have to face. Standing alone when the people I loved most walked away, and I had survived it. More than survived it. I had claimed something precious from it, my dignity, my self-respect, my freedom. And as the clock ticked gently in the background and the sun climbed higher in the sky, I realized something simple and stunning. Sometimes the hardest goodbyes are the ones that set you free. In the days and weeks that followed, their departure, the house settled into a kind of stillness that was entirely different from the strained silence I had lived with before. This stillness was warm, breathable, and soft like a well-worn quilt. At first, the quiet was startling, almost too large to fill, like a room with high ceilings and no furniture. But soon it became a canvas, a place where I could paint a new life in colors of my own choosing. I moved room by room, opening windows to let in fresh air, rearranging furniture to suit my own rhythms rather than accommodating the chaos of a full house. I planted flowers in the front garden, bright, wild blooms that didn't match anything but made me smile every morning. I cooked small meals just for myself, setting the table even when it was only me sitting down to eat, lighting a candle just because I could. The house slowly began to reflect not a family that had fractured under the weight of resentment, but a woman who had chosen peace over conflict, dignity over dependence, joy over guilt. I spent my mornings walking along the tree-lined streets of the neighborhood, exchanging nods and polite greetings with neighbors, many of whom knew something had changed, but politely avoided asking for details. I spent my afternoons lost in books, curled up in the sunroom where the light pooled warmly across the floor. I reconnected with old friends, inviting them over for tea, their laughter filling the house in a way that felt effortless and real, without the tightrope feeling that had hung over every interaction with Mark and his wife. I was no longer shrinking myself to fit into spaces that demanded gratitude without offering respect. I was expanding into my own life, and it felt like taking a full breath after years of shallow ones. Mark called a few times, usually short, stilted conversations about logistics or brief updates about the kids. I answered when I wanted to, not out of obligation, but out of genuine choice. Each call was a reminder that love doesn't always disappear even when relationships change shape. But I never let the conversations drift into guilt or regret. I didn't bring up the past. I didn't ask for apologies. I didn't chase after old wounds hoping for closure. I had already given that gift to myself. The closure wasn't in what he said or didn't say. It was in how I chose to move forward. As summer rolled into fall, I found myself smiling more easily, laughing without that tight knot of sadness sitting in my chest. I wasn't pretending to be happy to make others comfortable. I was actually happy, sometimes in big bursts and sometimes in small, ordinary moments that would have slipped by unnoticed in my old life. I sat on the porch in the evenings with a cup of tea, watching the sun dip below the trees, feeling a contentment that wasn't flashy or grand but was solid, unshakable. I realized that real freedom isn't about cutting people out of your life in anger. It's about making room for yourself in your own life without apology. It's about loving others without losing yourself. It's about forgiving, not because they ask for it or deserve it, but because you refuse to let old pain dictate your future. And perhaps most importantly, it's about understanding that sometimes the people we love will disappoint us in ways we never imagined, and that doesn't make the love we gave any less real. It simply means we have to love ourselves even more fiercely to survive it. In that quiet, rebuilt life, surrounded by simple joys and new beginnings, I found the truest kind of victory, not over them, but for myself. Looking back now, I realize that the moment Mark stood in front of the family and demanded rent wasn't the beginning of our unraveling. It was simply the moment I could no longer pretend that unconditional love alone was enough to hold everything together. It had been unraveling quietly for years, in small ways, in overlooked kindnesses and mounting assumptions, until the fabric of our bond wore thin. For so long, I believed that loving someone meant carrying their burdens without complaint, sacrificing silently, and asking for nothing in return. I thought that by giving more, I would eventually be seen, valued, cherished. But what I understand now is that love without respect is not love at all. It's obligation disguised as devotion. In reclaiming the house, I didn't just reclaim a roof and 4 walls. I reclaimed my sense of self. I chose, perhaps for the first time in my life, to put my own dignity above someone else's comfort. It wasn't about punishing Mark or his family. It was about telling myself, with every action, that I deserved better. And maybe the greatest gift of all was realizing that even when love disappoints, even when family falls short, I am still whole. The house is mine now, not just on paper but in spirit. It holds new memories, quiet mornings, laughter with friends, moments of pure, unfiltered peace. I have planted gardens that bloom in wild colors, cooked meals that nourish more than just my body, and built a home that honors the woman I have become. I do not regret loving Mark. I do not regret the years I spent giving him everything I could. But I am no longer willing to lose myself in the process. I hope one day he understands. I hope he teaches his children a better way to honor those who love them. But whether he does or doesn't, I have made peace with it. Because my life is no longer measured by anyone else's gratitude. It is measured by the quiet, steady beat of my own heart, finally free to love myself as fiercely as I have loved others. This is not the ending of my story. It's just the beginning of a life lived on my own terms, full of hope, resilience, and unshakable self-respect. Have you ever reached a moment where you had to choose between keeping the peace or standing up for your worth? Share your story in the comments. We would love to hear your journey of quiet strength and self-discovery. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring, emotional true life stories that honor dignity, resilience, and the power of choosing yourself. In a world where love and loyalty are often tested by pride, betrayal, and misunderstanding, true strength is found not in shouting to be heard, but in standing quietly and firmly in your own worth. My journey wasn't just about losing a place in my son's home. It was about rediscovering a place in my own heart. When Mark demanded rent in front of family, what he unknowingly did was hand me the key to a door I had long forgotten. The door back to myself. Choosing to reclaim the house was not an act of revenge, but an act of self-respect. It was the moment I decided that love offered without dignity is not love that should be accepted. Through grief, disappointment, and painful goodbyes, I carved out a life that is no longer dependent on someone else's recognition or approval. I learned that peace is not something handed to us by others. It is something we build, one hard but beautiful choice at a time. Today, the house stands not as a monument to the past, but as a testament to a woman who, after giving everything to everyone else, finally gave something to herself: freedom. Freedom to live with joy, freedom to love without losing herself, freedom to choose herself over obligation. And in that freedom, in that quiet reclaiming of her own soul, she found something even more powerful than love returned. She found love that no longer needed to be earned. She found herself.